Family, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's weekly news update. And we've got quite a bit to cover this week, so I hope you're buckled up and ready for a good update. We've got a lot of information to cover. Just before we get started, I'd love to encourage you all, please make sure you like and share the link with our brothers and sisters to give them the same update and sort of the same heads up that we get every week so we can get in front of these things together. Amen and amen. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. If you're on Rumble, give us a Rumble. If you're on Facebook, well, go on over to Remnant House Ministries and like the page and connect with us. And if you're on YouTube, well, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and share this with your brothers and sisters. We've got a lot to cover tonight, and I'm thankful for every one of you, grateful for every one of you here on the chat. And I'm going to assume that you can hear me fine. so, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we do have a website that we use for updates. We use it for keeping track of the information that we are, well, honestly, tracking. So, we're keeping an eye on the different things that are happening throughout the earth and wanting to stay, as we like to say around here, we like to stay informed but not be overwhelmed. If you're getting updates 5, 10, 15 times a day, that's going to fray your nerves. That's going to make it difficult for you to focus on the task that you have to do as an individual member of the body of Messiah. But if you are getting no updates at all and you're completely disconnected, as many people were saying to us for quite a while, well, then that's just as bad, because these things can kind of catch you by surprise and and make it harder for you to prepare. So, thank you to everybody that shares the links. Thank you to everybody that participates with us in these updates, and for those that send in links or stories or share things throughout the week. I really appreciate it. You make this job easier by constantly communicating and staying in community. Amen and amen. So again, remnantwatch.com. Be sure to check that out. Be sure to bookmark that site. Amen. And just like my brother says, so we can be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Amen. And this week we've got a lot to cover. There's a lot going on. Of course, many of you already are getting a lot of updates about this situation going on in the Middle East. We're going to be talking about it from a slightly different angle and hopefully giving you a different peer view into what we see going on here as we take a look at that as a house. And hopefully we'll be able to make some sense of what looks like a pretty crazy situation unfolding in the Middle East. And many of you who are awake and aware and are not asleep are knowledgeable enough to know what a false flag is, to know what um, when you're being manipulated. And so there's some things that we're starting to see that appear to be manipulation, and that's when our antennas go up. That's when I believe a lot of other people's antennas are going up, and I do believe that these things are unfolding much more quickly. They're unraveling, I should say, much more quickly than they did in the past. People are more awake than they've ever been. You also have the advent of the internet, which um, hyper scrutinizes things as a mob, if you will. So that allows for cross examination at a level that I don't think we've ever experienced to this point, which is a very good thing. If you are a lover of the truth and you don't like to be manipulated, well, we're living in the age of light, and it's going to continue to increase because the Bible tells us that our adversary is destroyed by the brightness of the King's coming. Amen. And that is a very big promise that we have to keep in mind. It is the brightness of the King's coming that destroys the power of the wicked one. So, light is our inheritance. We will continue to see more and more information. Many of you are being confirmed. Some of you are being validated right now. Some of you who have been warning and telling people to get ready and telling people to stop taking these things lightly. You're being vindicated right now. This is your hour of vindication. This is an hour of confirmation for those that weren't sure if you were on the right track as you were returning unto Elohim and walking in his ways. Well, now they're wishing they were you, right? So encourage them and be there for them as people awaken in this hour. Going on over to Remnant Watch right now, the very first story we're going to take a look at may not look like much, and that's the reason why we made it our headline story. Because this is one of those stories that might go under the radar if you didn't know what this meant. So the Biden administration is set to allow Iran UN sanctions on ballistic missile program to expire. So they're not doing anything. It's actually a non-doing. They're not renewing these sanctions coincidentally at this specific time. I wonder if they were timed to expire at this time. Biden administration, some UN sanctions on regime set to expire this week. And of course, Hamas war against Israel is slated to be given a potent shot in the arm if the U.S. and its European allies allow UN sanctions to be lifted on Iran's capability to purchase and supply missiles to enemies of the U.S. and Israel, according to experts on Tehran. This coming Wednesday is the so-called transition day, when the expiration of the UN's embargo against Iran's ability to procure and sell missiles and drones goes into effect. And Richard Goldberg, who served on the National Security Council during the Trump administration as the director for countering Iranian weapons of mass destruction, told Fox News Digital the president gives a speech saying he is heartbroken about the images of the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust and opposes Hamas. And a week later, he hands a gift to Hamas's sponsor, Iran. My heart breaks to see the president lift this embargo. Okay. So these narratives, one of the things that we keep an eye on around here is we're watching trends and we're watching how they manipulate the masses. If you haven't figured it out by now, government is a compound word. Ment means your mind and govern is control. So we're looking at massive levels of mind control, attempting to keep all of the people in line, and it's not working, but they're still trying. So there's that. But why is this important? Well, they just so coincidentally, they had Iran's hands tied behind their back. They couldn't sell their weapons technology. They also could not buy spare parts, so they couldn't conduct war. Well, we're just going to go ahead and lift that because you see, there are some forces in this world that you are all figuring out very cleverly. You're very sharp people, so you're hard to fool. They want war, right? So this is very suspicious that this would coincidentally be lifted off of Iran as a limitation. So I have to agree that our hearts should break that they're fueling the fire for conflict. They're throwing logs on the fire. Let's see if those logs light up. We're going to be paying attention with great interest. And of course, most of you know that Israel is in the midst of a state of conflict. It was already in the midst of a state of conflict for several years internally. And there were over 500,000 Israelis this last week on the streets demanding the resignation of the current government. So it is not going according to plan. Israel is fending off aggression at Lebanon border as it prepares to invade Gaza. This is on October 16th. So just backing up a little bit, guys, to pick up from last week. Israel's defense forces are poised to begin a ground operation in Gaza against Hamas terrorists. And we've been hearing about this. And yet this is causing some serious backlash because within the ruling party of the United States of America, well, there's a lot of mixed feelings about which way this should go. You guys can go ahead and read this at length if you're interested in that. But the fact is that despite the declarations of war and what seems to be a lopsided, very easy to get, the high ground, they're not quite getting it. And the reason why is because of what we talked about last week. Most of you, again, very sharp folks are picking up that There's some things that don't add up. And there are several videos that are now emerging. I won't share them here, but they're available on BitChute. They're available on various platforms where you've got either ex-military, secret services, or military services in Israel that are now coming out and doing public statements saying this is impossible. And then speaking about their operational experience and what have you. So they're throwing a lot of questions in the air, which is, I believe, slowing this whole scenario down. They were running toward this full-on conflagration, and suddenly finding it just a little harder to garner the support that I think they thought was going to be automatic. And again, we got to remember, again, folks, we're not naive. We're paying attention, right? So we know that this guy was politically in some serious trouble not very long ago, and there were a lot of protests in the street, right? And so, nothing galvanizes your people like a common enemy. Iron will. Israel's war on Gaza is do or die. It is do or die. It may be politically do or die for those in power, says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after vow to cut off the snake of Iran. And there's a lot of back chatter. This got a lot of blowback. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the war in Gaza is do or die for his country as he addressed troops on the border with Lebanon. Netanyahu made the remarks as Israeli forces stepped up airstrikes ahead of looming ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. So we all have to stop for the 50 billionth time. I don't even remember how many times have they invaded Gaza. Does anybody know? Somebody look that up, because it seems to me that they do this every so often. But I digress. Again, I do believe that we're watching massive theatrics here. There's been leaking video that has been coming out. Many of you have been picking up on it. You're getting the hint, where they're showing crews creating footage, and somebody's filming the crew who's filming to create footage. So they're busting them. They're catching them creating the drama, the whole CNN trick, and so it's not working. And that's a very interesting development, because usually these things are like a runaway train. I think everybody that's in my generation and older and a little younger can tell you that, well, we've watched over the last 30 to 40 years were runaway trains. Like literally, once they started the narrative, it was over. I mean, even though we were like, wait a minute, there's questions, wait a minute, they would just go. Today, in today's world, it seems like they don't quite have the same kind of steam that they once had, and it's harder to drag public opinion down that road. And we're going to take a look at why here in just a moment. But take a look at this. This was coming out of Zero Hedge, and poll finds lackluster desire to arm or supply Israel, even among the GOP, which are traditionally quite, flag waving Israelis in the government, so they're usually quite supportive. So that's interesting, don't you think, that there's a bit of an awakening? I wonder if the remnant had anything to do with that. You guys praying out there? Are you praying for awakening? Are you praying for people's eyes to open? Is that what's going on here? Because your prayers, I believe, are starting to become more and more effective. Take a look at this. Bad news for the Israeli lobby and the warfare state. So remember that what we're talking about here is not the people of Israel, not the nation of Israel that has been scattered to the nations, if you will, but a state that has a dubious past. And on the same evening that President Biden delivered an address from the Oval Office to build support for sending $100 billion in weapons and other aid to Israel and Ukraine, CBS News published a poll showing surprising lackluster American support for arming and supplying Israel, even among Republicans. So the bloom is off the rose, folks. It looks to me like there's an awakening occurring to, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf and cries at one time too many. And that's kind of the effect that I'm watching. I'm not saying that that's the case here. I'm just saying it's sort of that effect, that, here we go again effect. And whether or not it's legit or not, the attack and all of that, whether that doesn't matter, the sentiment is what we're taking a look at. And they're not able to move it using their media like they used to be able to move it. You remember, folks, when there was only three major news outlets, and man, when they united on a story, that was it. Nobody got another word in edgewise. And there were plenty of things that they misled the people with, but there was no way to get past that barricade, right? Not anymore. Now, people don't get their news the same way. They don't rely on um, um, media the same exact way as they used to. And so it's starting to really unravel. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that we need to go back to a little more citizen journalism. Okay, I personally feel a lot more comfortable with a guy with a camcorder just walking through town saying, "Here's what I'm seeing," than some of these manufactured reports. So I believe people are waking up to the sort of the Hollywood effect that they're putting on news. They're intentionally trying to move you, trying to form your opinion for you, rather than just simply give you the data, the information, and let you make up your own mind. They're constantly steering you. And that has gotten old. That has gotten really old. How many are tired of being steered? I'll make my own conclusion. Thank you very much. I'd like just the information, and then we can decide for ourselves. But of course, they're always trying to steer you toward their prepackaged, predetermined solutions to the problem that they created. So there's that. And now it's starting to spread throughout the region. So we knew that this would potentially happen. I believe this is their intent. I believe that's why they're going to suddenly lift the sanctions off of Iran, coincidentally, right? I mean, who really buys that as a coincidence, right? I don't. Sorry, I just don't. And this was on CNN, and so we have to decide how much of this report we're going to actually believe. But but here it is: Navy warship near Yemen. So this just occurred. Navy warship intercepts multiple missiles. Officials are saying. Now, again, this is the report. U.S. Navy warship operating in the Middle East intercepted multiple projectiles near the coast of Yemen on Thursday, two U.S. officials told CNN. One of the officials said the missiles were fired by Iranian-backed Houthi militants. So it was a missile, and they know exactly who shot it. They love to wrap these things up in a nice little bow and hand it to you. And so they're deliberately painting certain people as bad guy, because they know that you need that dichotomy, and that it comes from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, folks. They always give you bad and good, left and right, red and blue. They're always going to do this to you. And we have to step off the merry-go-round completely, but I digress. So now we're starting to see Navy vessels that are coming under fire, that are coming into direct conflict. So America cannot stand on the sidelines of this conflict. Unfortunately, they're going to be, I believe America is deliberately being engaged, and that probably is the plan. Drone attacks are starting to manifest now, where we're seeing U.S. military base in southern Syria, and there are some injuries, and this is starting to step up. So a military base in southern Syria, where U.S. troops have maintained a presence to train forces as part of a broad campaign against the Islamic State group, was attacked by drones on Thursday, two U.S. officials told the Associated Press. Is it the same two U.S. officials that were talking to us about the boat just a moment ago? Is it just two other U.S. always two officials? Now they've got two anonymous people. One drone was shot down, but another caused minor injury, said one of the officials who spoke in condition of anonymity to discuss the matter before an official announcement about the incident. So again, do we buy this? Well, we're going to wait for further information, but there are certain similarities. So you're starting to see them and you're going to start to pick them up. And after a while, you start going, how clever. And they use the same tactic over and over again. So you'll start to pick it up after a while and you'll start to go, wow, this is all contrived. Like a lot of this is just timed to move public opinion and make you think a certain way. And they're not going to get everybody, but they're hoping to get at least enough people moving in that sort of general direction where there'll be less, suspicion and concern about whatever decisions they ultimately decide, to make. And as a result of this is again, we don't know this. We're taking their word for it, right? But here's the narrative being spun around you. So pay attention to the narrative because that's telling you at least what one group of people are trying to make you believe anyway. The Hamas leader is holding talks with top Iranian officials amid growing fears the Israel-Gaza war could mushroom into a wider Middle East conflict. That'll happen if you attack boats out there, right? So as IDF strikes 2 Hezbollah cells in Lebanon and Syrian international airports, which we reported last week, they attacked 2 airports in Syria. So I guess apparently Israel feels it's entitled to go over to Syria anytime it feels like it and just blow up their airports. Folks, that kind of activity tends to have an expiration date. I'm just saying, generally speaking, the world doesn't, people don't generally sit still forever for stuff like that. So I expect that it's going to get dicey here pretty quick. And of course, I find some of these headlines almost laughable because it's like we're not paying attention. Blinken says U.S. is ready to get involved in Israel-Hamas war if line is crossed. We won't hesitate. Okay, you already crossed the line. This is laughable, folks. This is all theater. The United States is poised to get involved in the Israel-Hamas war should the conflict escalate into regional forces intentionally targeting. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about the Israeli military, and they're actually saying the Israel-Hamas war. Like, Hamas doesn't even have it. They don't have jets, they have paragliders. They don't have tanks, they have pickup trucks. I have an army. They just have marauders that came across an open fence that nobody plugged for 7 hours. I mean, to make it out as if Hamas is a formidable enemy. No wonder they're trying to drag in Iran, because it's laughable to say that these people who have been behind basically a human, an open air prison, are going to represent an existential threat such that they got to marshal the world. Okay, the first world nations need to come together against Hamas. And the United States has got to supply them weapons to go in there. No, they don't. And all of this, again, is just meant to, it is ridiculous. It's meant to draw us emotionally into this thing. And I see the work of Satanists. I see the work of manipulators. I see witchcraft. I smell witchcraft. And so my antennas are way up. Leave me a note in the comments if you're also getting a little you're getting a little more squinty-eyed as you're going forward, because again, a lot of it seems like there's a group that really, really, really want to go to war bad, and they can't seem to get anybody to cooperate. And what I think is interesting is, despite the rhetoric, and Iran has made a lot of rhetorical statements and have definitely said some inflammatory things toward Israel. So I'm not giving them a pass. But I think it is interesting that they're not jumping. They're not lobbing missiles. They're not attacking. They're not falling for it. They're not crossing the tripwire. And it would seem to me that there's a consensus on the other side of the world to let these guys sort of keep their shenanigans to themselves. We're not going to play as much as possible, and we're going to let the truth just come out. This seems to be what they're doing. And they're trying as much as they can to not engage, which is a very interesting strategy. That's got to be very frustrating for the warmongers who desperately want a banker's war. Yeah, exactly. Like my brother says, they desperately want, because you don't know it, but their system is imploding and they don't want anybody to see that. War is a wonderful way to cover that up. And they're not getting that cover. So uh, and again, they're starting to, and if they can't create conflict in one place, they're going to try to go create conflict somewhere else, because this is what they do. And I'm not saying it's any one government. It is operatives of our adversary working within all the governments, working within all kinds of organizations. So if you're trying to find the bad guys, they're in everywhere. Okay, they need to be rooted out, rooted or routed. I'm not sure. Somebody help me. Is it rooted or routed? Anyway, they need to be kicked out. Okay, we need to get them out because they're the problem, and then the world can go on to beating its swords into farm implements. Yep, that's right. Beating your swords into farm implements so that you can start to make food instead of war. That's a good idea. And more lemonade. I say there should be more lemonade and more back porches. And so, of course, if they can't get the war going in one place, they're going to keep trying in all kinds of places. And the U.S. has been knocking on the South China Sea door for quite some time. U.S. renews its warning. It will defend the Philippines after incidents with Chinese vessels in the South China Sea. Oh, don't. They're just looking for a fight somewhere. The United States renewed a warning Monday that it would defend the Philippines in case of an armed attack under a 1951 treaty after Chinese ships blocked and collided with two Filipino vessels off a contested shoal in the South China Sea. Philippine diplomats summoned a Chinese embassy official in Manila on Monday for a strongly worded protest following Sunday's collision off of Second Thomas Shoal. No injuries were reported, but the encounters damaged a Philippine Coast Guard ship and a wooden-hulled supply boat operated by Navy personnel, officials said. So we still see them, constantly sort of doing that eye-poking thing in the South China Sea. And guys, I want you to know that this is like being off the coast of Florida. Okay, so this is very provocative for nations in that region. And again, the attempt, we know this, we talked about this last week, that there's a concerted effort to bring us into a massive war. And so we have to kind of keep an eye on these things to see where they're at, but understand that this was all prophesied to come. Wars and rumors of wars were prophesied to come. And all this is the machination. Some of it is the fall of our adversary, and his days are numbered, and the lights are coming on. All their secrets are getting out. It's going to make it harder and harder for them to pull off future shenanigans when people are learning their tricks. That magician needs a different show. Okay. And don't think for a second that China is ignoring the Middle East. As we told you last week, they didn't just deploy one warship. It turns out we saw one. It turns out they've deployed 6 warships to the Middle East over fears a crisis could spark World War III. So China says, okay, we're going to come over there. And I have a feeling that China is playing mediator and observer for future prosecution should war crimes occur, because these guys lie. China has deployed 6 warships in the Middle East as the conflict between Israel and Hamas escalates, according to reports. The 44th Naval Escort Task Force from the People's Liberation Army Eastern Theater has been involved in routine operations in the region and spent several days in Oman last week. So again, guys, we were talking about how that China was becoming much more visible in the Middle East. And its partnership, it brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Remember that? We talked about that in the spring. And then recently, again, we brought it up so that we could reconnect here. And now you're seeing them actively involved in this theater. Why is this important? Because according to the book of Revelation, the river Euphrates would dry up to make room or make way for the kings of the east to come into this theater of operations. We're getting awful close here to the place where this all finishes. All right, we're awful close here. They're within shooting distance of Armageddon or Har Megiddo. Okay, so that's why we've got to pay attention to all of these machinations, because Bible prophecy is coming to pass in front of our faces. Maybe not the way we expected. So now we got to go back and recheck what we thought and what we assumed and see if we can come up with it. But China is a formidable threat. And maybe the U.S. is deciding to try to pick this fight now because it knows that the longer it waits, the stronger China becomes. And maybe that's the reason why they're trying to pick this conflict now. China could have 1,000 nuclear warheads and missiles that can hit the U.S. by 2030. That's 7 years from now. 7 years from now, just coincidentally. Okay, China is set to at least double its nuclear warheads by the end of the decade, according to the Pentagon. The growing world superpower had over 500 operational nuclear warheads as of May. In 2022, China declined U.S. requests to hold strategic talks about its rapid nuclear weapons buildup. No, we don't want to talk to you. We don't want to talk to you. When you guys were making all kinds of missiles, did you need to ask anybody's permission? But now you want to talk. Now you want us to come and talk with you. They're not playing. And so the world is changing right in front of your face, folks. And it's going fast. And it's happening a lot faster than people realize. Now, remember last week we talked about this, and actually the week before. This is why we got to keep tracking this stuff. So we saw Kim Jong-un go visit with the Russians, right? And we heard about him providing some support to Russia in its conflict with Ukraine. Now, you know, and I know, and we all know that ain't nobody doing that out of the goodness of their heart. There had to be an ulterior motive, and most likely was an exchange of weaponry. We'll give you some conventional stuff, and hey, you give us some of that cool stuff you got back there in the development area, right? You give us some of those really cool toys. And that wasn't hard to figure out. I mean, come on, folks. And now, lo and behold, back from his trip to Russia, feeling his oats and feeling strong and mighty, what does North Korea do? Renew its threats. It threatens the U.S. with a preemptive nuclear strike. The agency's commentary comes as a response to the U.S. decision to deploy a B-52 nuclear strategic bomber and a fifth-generation F-22 Raptor stealth fighter jet to the south of the Korean peninsula. And so North Korea warned the United States about the possibility of carrying a preemptive nuclear strike over its attempt to unleash a nuclear war by deploying its strategic capability in the Korean peninsula, the Korean Central News Agency reported on Friday. The agency's commentary comes as a response to the U.S. decision to deploy a B-52 nuclear strategic bomber and a fifth-generation F-22 Raptor stealth fighter jet to the south of the Korean peninsula. So they're using this as a provocation, and of course, to some degree, I think it might be. And but they are sure saber rattling with a lot more confidence these days. So again, that starts to make you start to wonder, what's going on. And Putin and Xi, they have their own vision for a new world order. The New York Times has an article out. I can't show it to you because it's behind a paywall, but they've got an article out saying China's close ties with Russia are countering America's dominance. And so they're working together to slowly destroy the power without having to go to a kinetic conflict. And of course, just like any other situations, when you're dealing with powers that are being toppled, they'd rather fight. They'd rather just duke it out. So it's kind of interesting to watch this from a 10,000 foot view as the world changes, as we wake up to where the real bad guys are. Some of them were closer than we thought. we're a little embarrassed by that, but that's reality. And we're starting to realize that the world is reshaping in a very, very different way, maybe than we thought. And so we're going to have to go back now and re-examine our thoughts on how this was all going to play out. And that's a good thing. I think it'll humble everybody, start all over again. One of the things that I think is happening especially in the United States, but I think all around the world, is the confidence that people have in the traditional, what is called mainstream media. It couldn't be lower. Media confidence in the U.S. matches the 2016 record low, and 32% have a great deal or fair amount of trust in the media's news reporting. That means 58%. Is that right? Yep. 32, 68% don't buy their fair amount and don't believe they have a great deal of trust. Okay. So they always report it this way, but they don't say it the other way. 68% ain't buying it. Okay. 32% of Americans who say they trust the media, mass media, a great deal or a fair amount. So they had to combine fair amount and great deal to get to 32%. That is a collapse, folks. Okay. Although trust in media currently matches the historic low, it was statistically similar in 2021. So, folks, they're now losing the ability to steer. So they've got a runaway train. They got no brakes. They can't control it. And it's things like this that are destroying their hegemony on the news and on information. It's guys like this and people they attacked. Okay. When they went after Tucker Carlson, that's looking more and more like a big mistake. They tried to make it sound like it was no big deal. This man continues to get more views on a video than they get for their whole network. So he just continues to defy them. And Tucker Carlson just challenged one of the left's most sacred cows, the George Floyd death, an ex-con who died with an elephant dose of fentanyl in his system and a history of health issues. So he went into a very deep discussion about this. I'm not going to go into it, but the bottom line is this kind of reporting and this kind of independent media, if you will, is what is destroying the confidence in the mainstream media. So they're not able, so they're launching their operations with the thought that they're able to control the people with the media, and that part's failing. So they still went ahead with the op, but the part that they thought would be a critical part that would come to their aid is failing because of light, because of you, because you meme sharing, article sharing, video sharing people are continuing to destroy their illusions, okay, their delusions. And all this media stuff is starting to fall apart. And a lot of it was, I wonder if they didn't make a big mistake giving everybody YouTube. That's just saying. I'm wondering if they don't regret that now. Right? So this is definitely starting to unravel. And so they have to keep throwing things at us. I'm only putting this in not because I necessarily believe this, but I think this goes to show you the way they use the media to shape public opinion and get you thinking bad guy, good guys. Okay. So here's a story. We just talked about North Korea, and they're making threats because they don't want to be provoked on their peninsula for nuclear war. Some might consider that to be quite reasonable and sane, but that's a whole nother talk. But take a look at this. The Hamas terrorists likely use, look at this now. This is coming out on Fox News. So this is meant to hit GOP, right wing, shore up the support, pull up the right side. Okay, watch. Hamas terrorists likely used North Korean weapons during brutal attack on Israel, evidence shows. Hamas terrorists have been documented using North Korea F-7 rocket launcher, the Bullseye-guided anti-tank missile, and the Type 58 self-loaded rifle. The Hamas terrorists, I definitely do not trust this guy, by the way. The Hamas terrorists that carried out a barbaric assault on Israel on October 7th likely used, so they don't even know this for sure, but they're just throwing shade. Okay, so this is just someone's opinion. Likely used North Korean weapons. Do you have tracking numbers? Do you have anything? Nope, just likely use North Korean weapons. Analysis and various evidence, including a militant video and weapons seized by Israel, now show North Korea has previously denied selling arms to the terrorist group. One weapon at the center of the controversy used by Hamas is the F-7 rocket-propelled grenade, a shoulder-fired weapon that fighters typically use against armored vehicles. So, whether or not it's true is not the point. The point is that they're using their weaponized media to make you think this way. So naturally, we all are becoming more suspicious. So what do you suppose the public is doing? And as a result, this is creating frustration on their side because they can't get you to buy it. Nothing's more frustrating than a con man who can't get you to buy the con, right? You're frustrating them. How many have done that? I love doing that. Ask them too many questions, right? Or interfere with that flow. And so they're not able to pull off what they're trying to pull off. Let's face it. Okay. Meanwhile, on the East, they're not trying to play these false flag games. They're not trying to manipulate their people the same way. And that's not to say that they aren't to some degree, because I think any government is always trying to look good in front of its people, massage the numbers, and make themselves look better than they already are. I think that's natural human nature. Okay. But I think there's another level of that we would call the deep state, or call, nefarious activity that is at a higher level of that comes under a high level of scrutiny. Let's just say it like that, right? So what are they doing over there? What's going on the other side of the earth? We're hearing just this news. What's happening over there? What are they focusing on? Are they sitting around their TV sets wondering if, Hamas is going to come blow up something? Are they sitting there on their television sets worried about the Middle East conflict? I'm going to say a big fat no, folks. 10 years on, the Brixton Road Initiative pioneers high quality cooperation for global prosperity. They're signing billion-dollar deals as the Belt and Road Initiative is embracing its next golden decade. This was a conference held by China, and it had something like 75% of the countries were participants. I mean, the world's going on and ignoring this nonsense, okay? And again, this is why I think there's a lackluster response. As the initiator of the BRI, China has been actively promoting small-scale yet impactful projects through the construction of roads, railways, schools, hospitals, agricultural facilities have helped alleviate poverty and improve people's well-being in the most needed places. So this Belt and Road Initiative is down where the people live. It is producing a massive, massive financial upswing and opportunity for those that are connecting with them. And as a result, they're drawing more and more countries into the BRICS system. So as we told you throughout the year, this was a formidable threat to the West and to the Western system, because these folks are not trying to be big shots. They're not trying to be elite. They're just trying to manage their countries, and they're coming at it with a little bit different attitude, folks. And this is what, boy, we got to learn. I mean, we got to figure this out, okay? And I mean, just the West has some serious issues. It's a little too concerned with military stuff and weaponries and things like that, and not getting involved where it needs to. And this is the kind of stuff right here, this next story that China's doing, that's winning the hearts and minds of people over. That's going to keep doing it, because look at this. China's financial system is pledging efforts to serve the real economy. So what are these guys doing? They're not sending trillions of dollars overseas. They're not spending billions of dollars and announcing it as part of their initiatives to fund wars. Nope. Look Look at these guys. China's financial system will continue to improve its ability to serve the real economy, according to a report from the State Council. The report on financial work was submitted on Saturday to lawmakers for deliberation on an ongoing session of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress on the fourth quarter. So basically, what they're going to do is they're going to continue to make loans, and they're going to continue to do infrastructure development, and they're going to continue to support short-term, medium, and long-term lending for manufacturing sector, for medium-sized technology companies. Okay, what this article basically details for you is how they're basically taking this moment to reinvest in their small businesses, to reinvest in their infrastructure, to prepare for the next upswing. Every economy, world economies, all economies go through ups and downs. And the downs come, and then eventually what happens is there's an upswing and high demand. And the people that are prepared, the people that are ready, the people that are stocked up and ready to do business in those times, well, they're going to do well, right? So China is getting ahead of this current recession and ahead of this current financial situation, knows full well that the hegemony of the West is in its final days. So it's preparing for the post-West world. If you know what I'm trying to say, they're preparing for there to be no, they're going on as if the United States is literally a non-factor. That's very dangerous knowledge to have, or information, because what that basically says is that we're becoming more and more irrelevant. And folks, that is a big, even the Taliban, man, I'm talking about Afghanistan here, even the Taliban's joining. It's almost laughable, folks. Taliban seizes control of Afghanistan in 2021 and control vast mineral resources that would allow China to better manipulate the global economy. So they're going into bed with Afghanistan without firing a shot. The Taliban plans to send a team to China to formally seek membership for Afghanistan in Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. The announcement follows the Taliban's attendance this week at the third BRI forum in Beijing, which drew officials from Afghanistan and 34 other countries. So you see what's happening here, folks, is while everybody's saber rattling over here, these folks are doing the real stuff of rebuilding post-SWIFT, post-American system, because they have this sanction thing that they do, and they grab people's things, and you know all about it. They've done it to you as well. So countries have decided they no longer want to participate in this, and this is starting to affect the West. And you say, how is that starting to affect the West? Well, who do you think buys all this debt? So they just passed this law, or they just passed this budget, rather, and who's going to buy the Treasury? So who's going to lend the $1.7 trillion? Look at this. The U.S. just wrapped up its fiscal year with a budget deficit near $1.7 trillion, and it's up 23%. What? That is runaway. And not only is it runaway growth, it's also runaway don't invest, because you're going to lose your money. The federal government wound up its fiscal year in September, wrapping up a year in which some thought the shortfall could exceed $2 trillion. The U.S. ended up with an imbalance of $1.695 trillion, up $320 billion. The budget report comes the same week Biden asked Congress to allocate $105 billion for national security priorities. So, how does this affect you? How's this affecting you? Well, I'm going to tell you how. I'm going to tell you real world how this affects you. Mama was gassed this morning, and she said, Peter, something I put in the cart to save because they were out of stock. They're now in stock, and the price has gone up by 50%. So it was $60. I think it was a salt item or something, some kind of like a Celtic salt or something. And it was like $60 to this item. Same exact item was out of stock. Comes back and finally comes back into stock. Now it's 90 something dollars. So 60 to 90, that's 50% of its original price added on. That's how much it went up. Okay. In just a week or however long it was that she put it in the cart and then waited until they got it back in stock. So when it came back in stock, it came back in stock at the new price. Do you see what's slowly happening here? And it's not happening all at once. It's happening one little chip at a time. So you go to the store and you notice these few things or this or that. And it's never one place. It's sort of like they're killing you with 1,000 little cuts, little thieves, filthy little thieves. Okay. So how are the banks handling this? Man, are we learning a lot about banks. Banks are a bunch of liars. Man, crazy what we're learning about banks. And as a result of the lights coming on, what's happening to the banks? Nice and quiet, though. Don't tell anybody, okay? Because they're trying to keep this quiet, guys. They don't want anybody to know. They're trying to keep it nice in they're keeping it on the DL, on the QT, on the hush hush. Big banks are quietly cutting thousands of employees, and more layoffs are coming. Even as the economy has surprised forecasters with its resilience, it's hanging in there. People under mass psychosis are continuing to use the currency. Lenders have cut headcount or announced plans to do so, with the key exception being JP Morgan Chase, which happens to own a major part of the infrastructure of not Bitcoin, but the other one. Anyway, I'll think of Ether. And so that may be why JP Morgan is surviving. The next 5 largest U.S. banks are a combined 20,000 positions so far this year, according to company filings. Key factor driving the cuts is the job hopping in finance, slow drastically from earlier years, leaving banks with more people than they expected. Oh, goodness. Did you hear that? Did you hear that excuse? Oh, there used to be more bank hopping, and now more people are not bank hopping, so we got more people than we thought. That was ridiculous. That was utterly ridiculous. The excuses that they're using. I was talking to one of the guys today, and I said, it's almost like an IQ test, and the people with the very high IQ, they left already, okay? And they left a long time ago. And then the next layer started to figure out, and then they got out. And then the next layer started to figure it out, and then they got out, right? And so now we're down, we're getting down to the not so bright that have taken the place of the medium bright who was behind the okay bright, who was behind the super bright, that all left. They're all gone now. So now we're down to this idiocracy. I'm not even kidding. It's really crazy. So how's it affecting us? Well, it's slowly starting to chip away. Like it's taken a while to finally hit, but it's slowly starting to hit. The Dow closes nearly 300 points lower after 10-year treasury yields top 5%. Folks, this is not supposed to happen. For the first time since 2007, with live updates. And so again, the reason why you got to keep raising the interest rate is because you're offering more for people who will lend you their money. And the only reason why you got to keep offering more is because people don't want to lend you their money. So we're seeing a collapse inside the system that they're trying to cover up with conflict because they don't want it to be exposed. They don't want you to see how they were financing mortgages. They don't want you to see how they were financing loans, how that your application actually created the money. They simply created a derivative and placed the money into your, quote, account. Folks, there's so much that is now coming out because of the light. You prayed for it. It's your fault. You prayed. I mean, you're part of the reason. Obviously, Elohim had to answer, but you prayed that the lights would come on. You prayed that people would get exposed, that these wicked things would get exposed. Well, this is what happens when you expose the wicked underpinnings of a system that we've all lived on. It's a house built on silicone sand. And it's coming down, folks. It's coming down. And this is not the first time. You can't find a record of the daily lives of people that lived in pre-flood. You can't find a record of the daily lives of people that lived through the various reset ages, because when the wipeouts come, it wipes out everything. It's massive. And so I believe we're headed to that exact type of moment right now. And I do believe that we need to be a people of prayer. How many are starting to figure out that prayer really works? Yeah. You're starting to find out that you can unite with your brothers and sisters and do more in prayer and united and in one accord than if you were physically on the ground in certain places. Obviously, there's benefit to both, but there is a value. The prayers of the righteous avail much, and things change. Guys are already there, suddenly see something they didn't see before. Some of you been praying. How many of you been praying for the hidden places to be revealed, or for the secret places to be exposed, or for the places where they're taking their victims to be uncovered? How many of you have started praying in the last recent years or recent time period for that exposure? Well, you're winning. Your efforts are winning. Your efforts are opening the doors and shining lights into the darkness. And as a result, those who thought that they could just easily manipulate your feelings and easily manipulate how you would reason are suddenly finding it much more difficult, because now you have you have your eyes open. You're no longer falling for the ruse, and it's no different than when you figure out someone's been lying to you for a while. Now, when they come back to talk to you, you all of a sudden everything they say is suspicious. Everything they told you, you now need to go double check. That's where people are right now, and in many ways, that's a good thing. But the bad news is that we, as a society here in the West, have many connections to a failing system. And so this is the reason why I believe Elohim says in Revelation chapter 18 to come out of her, my people, and be not a partaker of her sins, lest you receive of her plagues. And so he calls his people and extracts his people to to disconnect. Essentially, come out means to disconnect. And so many of you have begun your disconnection. Maybe you're in that process. And if that's your case, then I encourage you to keep on doing that. Find your fold, connect with your brethren. The further we go, the more we see confirmation that we were never meant to live in any other way than in community. The more we are together, the stronger we get, the more clear we become, and the less stress we're experiencing from that outside world. And so I believe this is the shift that we're seeing worldwide. I believe a lot of people are realizing that they bought into a Hollywood version of the world, a Hollywood version or a special effects version of how life should be. And when the rubber hit the road, when the real things started to happen, well, then we suddenly realized that growing food was important, and having a home and having a homestead and having space was important, and that people need space. And being on top of each other isn't a good idea. And pressing on one another the way that this world operates is not good. But here's the good news. If any of you who live in a city, if you just get in your car, we used to call it a Sunday drive, but you can just point your car in any direction and just drive and just keep driving in that one direction. If you live on the East Coast, don't drive east, okay? Drive west. But I'm just saying, drive an hour. Drive an hour and a half away from, I don't care if it's New York City, drive an hour and a half, watch what happens. You suddenly find yourself in the middle of nowhere. And that's how they've lied to us. They've made us feel like we're crowded. They've made us congregate in these very, very tight, densely populated areas. They've convinced us of a world that really doesn't exist. Most of it is lies. And as we step away from it, we start to see how the real world works. I believe that's why China's getting the upper hand, because they're going around the world going, yeah, whatever. That sounds great. Hey, you guys want to build a hospital? And that country's like, yeah. And you want to help? You want us to help you with some schools? Yeah. They're dealing with the real stuff, the things that make a difference in real life. And I believe that will be the direction we're all going to be going very quickly here. And so a lot of this shenanigans, a lot of this highfalutin finance and shady business and derivatives and all these markets and all this other stuff that complicated our lives for the love of mammon. And I believe all of it is coming under judgment in this hour. And that is why we're seeing the shaking that we're seeing. Because after all, it is the love of mammon that is the root of all evil. Well, I pray that this report has been an encouragement to you. It's always a blessing when we get a chance to get together. And I'm always thankful for these opportunities to hang out with every one of you. And I pray that you find your fold, connect with your brothers and sisters wherever you can, and be found faithful. Thank you for joining us on YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you aren't already. And thank you again for sharing. You guys make the difference. It's because of you that we reach any people at all, because you know they're not going to help us. So thank you for taking the time to share the link and encourage our brothers and sisters. Well, that's our report for tonight. May Elohim bless each and every one of you. Good night.